Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic, and as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. And now to the news. First, coronavirus cases in India passed 1 million, according to official data, as authorities struggle to check the spread of the pandemic across the world's second most populous nation.
The rise in cases is a welcome sign precisely because we are detecting as many people who are having the infection. Detection is most important because we'll be able to isolate them and further prevent its spread. So no country can have reduction in cases without having a surge in cases. So that's how the natural progression of every pandemic is. Having lower number of cases cannot be the goal for any country, simply because once the infection enters any country, all the susceptible people will get infected. The ideal goal for any country will be to have lower number of deaths. See, in terms of absolute numbers, the numbers from India might be overwhelming, but we will have to look at per million population. And when you look at cases per million or death per million, India still is in the lower exponential or even linear trajectory compared to the other countries in the world. So therefore, I think we should stop comparing in absolute numbers and look at per unit population.
With more than 600 people dying daily in India, lockdowns have been reimposed on millions of people across the world's second most populous nation. India's main hotspots had previously been the megacities of Mumbai and New Delhi, but smaller cities and rural areas, where 70% of Indians live, have recently begun to raise the alarm. The coastal tourist region of Goa on Thursday evening became the latest Indian state to go under lockdown, imposing a 3-day shutdown and a nighttime curfew until August 10. Meanwhile, Brazil topped 2 million coronavirus cases, according to official data that put the number of deaths at more than 76,000. Take a look. Figures published by the Health Ministry showed there were more than 45,000 new cases over the last 24 hours and an extra 1,300 deaths. Brazil is the second worst affected country in the world by the coronavirus after the United States. Brazil President Jair Bolsonaro tested positive for the coronavirus again. Bolsonaro, who is 65 years old, is in a high-risk group, and he said he would remain in quarantine at his official residence in Brasilia, from where he would continue to work by video conference. He also admitted on Monday by telephone interview with CNN that he cannot stand this routine of staying at home and said he was waiting anxiously to be given the all-clear to leave the house. He told the television channel he hasn't had any symptoms such as fever or respiratory difficulties since July 6. And he added that he continues to take the anti-malarial medication hydroxychloroquine. The drug has been pushed as a treatment for COVID-19 in many countries, but its effectiveness has not been formally proven, and the issue is deeply dividing the global scientific community. He is due to take a new test in the coming days. Since his diagnosis on July 7, Bolsonaro has been confined to the presidential palace alongside other people that have already contracted the virus. A strong magnitude 7 earthquake shook Papua New Guinea on Friday, but there were no immediate reports of damage or casualties. Echo Ortelesa Quinola reports from Papua New Guinea.
An earthquake struck near Port Moresby, the national capital of Papua New Guinea. The province of Popondeta was the epicenter. At around 12 high noon, where most people in Port Moresby are having lunch break and several errands, an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.0 hits Port Moresby and other nearby provinces. According to the Department of Mineral Policy and Geohazards Management, the earthquake occurred as a result of the interaction between Solomon Sea Plate and Australia Plate. It is of tectonic origin. It was felt strongly in Port Moresby and in the provinces of Lae City, Popondetta, and Kimbe. Minor damages were seen in malls, groceries, properties, and offices. As of this time, there were no reported casualties or were seriously injured. The earthquake occurred at a very considerable depth. The occurrence of tsunami generation is very low. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center issued a tsunami warning, but an hour later, the danger had passed. Filipinos in Port Moresby are in good place and are going on with their normal routines. Reporting from Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, this is Echo Hortaleza Quinola. We live in interesting times.
And there is a record infection rise in Southeast Australia. Joining us from Australia is Dwight Baloloy. Hello, Dwight.
Hello, Alma.
Good evening. Go ahead, Dwight.
From the Department of Health and Human Services, as of July 17, 2020, there are now a total of 5,165 COVID-19 cases with 428 reported cases since yesterday's report here in Victoria. Currently, there are 120 people in the hospital, 31 patients in intensive care unit, and 3 deaths were reported since yesterday. There are currently 2,462 active cases in Victoria as of this moment. Stage 3 restrictions are still in place within metropolitan Melbourne and Mitchellshire region, with only 4 reasons for people to go out, which is shopping for essential goods and food supplies, medical reasons, study or work if cannot be done at home, and exercise. There are now 11,235 cases here in Australia and a total of 116 deaths. Back to you, Amma.
All right. Dwight, do you know the reason for the spike in cases of coronavirus?
The Melbourne outbreak was initially blamed on health and security breaches at hotels where returning international travelers were under quarantine. Residents in and around the metropolitan Melbourne and Mitchellshire were ordered into a 6-week stay-at-home lockdown a week ago in a bid to contain the virus, and officials said they would give those restrictions more time to counter the outbreak before considering tougher measures. Australia's other states and territories have all closed their borders to people from Victoria in a bid to stop the outbreak from spreading. But the contagion has already reached Sydney, where there have been growing numbers of locally transmitted COVID-19 cases in recent days after an initial cluster erupted due to an infected Melbourneian visiting a popular pub. There have been 42 virus cases linked to that pub, but officials on Friday reported that several other infections with no clear to that cluster. The spread prompted authorities to again tighten restrictions on the number of people allowed into restaurants or to attend public gatherings like weddings and funerals in the Greater Sydney area. As I said earlier, Alma, nationwide, Australia has reported just over 11,000 cases of COVID-19 out of a population of around 25 million with 116 deaths. Thank you, Alma.
Thank you, Dwight, for your report there in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you. Reporting from Melbourne, Australia, this is Dwight Albert Baloloy, and we live in interesting times.
Okay, next, China has strongly opposed the British government's decision to ban Huawei's involvement in the 5G network there. Joining us live from the United Kingdom Bureau is Lauvan Season. Hello, Lauvan.
Hi, Alma, and thank you for having me. So here is my update here in the United Kingdom. Britain gave in to growing U.S. pressure and ordered the phased removal of Chinese telecoms giant Huawei from its 5G network, despite warnings of retaliation from Beijing. Britain's Digital Minister Oliver Dowden explains the reasons behind UK's decision. Let's listen in.
So to be clear, from the end of this year, telecoms operators must not buy any 5G equipment from Huawei. And once the telecom security bill is passed, it will be illegal for them to do so. This requirement will be set out in law by the telecom security bill. By the time of the next election, we will have implemented in law an irreversible path for the complete removal of Huawei equipment from our 5G networks. The new US measures restrict Huawei's ability to produce important products using US technology or software. The National Cybersecurity Center has reviewed the consequences of the US's actions. The NCSC has now reported to ministers that they have significantly changed their security assessment of Huawei's presence in the UK's 5G network. Given the uncertainty that this creates around Huawei's supply chain, the UK can no longer be confident it will be able to guarantee the security of future Huawei 5G equipment affected by the change in US foreign direct product. Let me assure members that this government is clear-eyed about China. We have been robust in our response to the imposition of new security laws in Hong Kong, including through our generous offer to British national overseas passport holders. What we want is a modern and mature relationship with China based on mutual respect, where we're able to speak frankly when we disagree, but also to work side by side with China on the issues where our interests converge.
So tensions have been escalating between London and Beijing quickly over a Chinese security clampdown on Hong Kong, a former British colony transferred it to China in 1997. To Beijing's anger, Britain announced Hong Kong residents would be allowed to move to Britain to escape the crackdown. Now, China reacted angrily after our government banned Huawei from the 5G network in the country amid security concern. China's ambassador in London, Liu Xiaoming, called it a disappointing and wrong decision. Again, let's listen in.
I think it first undermines the trust between the two countries. Trust, mutual respect are really the basis for our relationship. I said it's a disappointing and wrong decision on Huawei. Now, I would even say it's not only disappointing, it's a disheartening. The way you treat Huawei will be followed very closely by other Chinese businesses. When the mutual trust was undermined, it'd be difficult for the businesses to have a confidence.
So the policy reversal hands a long-sought victory to U.S. President Donald Trump's administration in its geopolitical tug-of-war with China. The White House said the decision reflects a growing international consensus that Huawei and other untrusted vendors pose a threat to national security as they remain beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he will visit Britain and Denmark next week, days after London pleased Washington with a ban on Chinese telecom giant Huawei. Let's listen in.
I leave on Monday for a quick trip to the United Kingdom and to Denmark, and I'm sure that the Chinese Communist Party and its threat to free peoples around the world will be high on top of that agenda. We'll certainly take time to discuss the UK's commendable decision to ban Huawei gear from its 5G networks and phase out the equipment from its existing networks. Can't protect this information. This information that transits across these untrusted networks that are of Chinese origin will almost certainly end up in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And so I think they did this for the right reasons. I think they did this to protect and preserve and secure the freedoms of the people of the United Kingdom. And I'm confident they'll continue in that policy. I think the work that's been done and the work that we've enabled to be done all across the world is now making clear to everyone, and that there is a real security risk. Now every nation is simply asking the question, how do you do it? What are the commercial impacts? How quickly can you move in that direction? And how do we ensure that we have available cost-effective solutions that don't subject our people to the risk that comes from having this infrastructure inside of the country?
So Huawei Huawei called it politicized and likely to put Britain in the digital slow lane. The politically fraught change in Britain's digital future was made by Prime Minister Boris Johnson during a meeting with his cabinet and the National Security Council. It requires companies to stop buying the new 5G equipment from Huawei starting next year and strip out existing gear by the end of 2027. The Trump administration has been urging all countries to shun Huawei, a leader in fifth-generation internet, calling the company an arm of the Chinese state. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government agreed to the ban after US sanctions blocked Huawei's access to the US chips. Critics have long alleged Huawei has close links to the Chinese Communist government and its equipment could be used for espionage purposes, although Huawei denies this. Back to you, Alma.
Okay, so Lovan, what would be the impact on internet users over there with this ban?
Sure. So the effect of the ban will mean customers will face higher bills as claimed by the Chinese firm itself because of the billions of pounds it will cost to remove the equipment and moving to other suppliers, as reported in the BBC News. Now, if Huawei will choose to focus its research and recruitment funds somewhere else, it could negatively impact the wider economy, and UK will also be seen as less friendly market by the other Chinese firms. Now, if you are using a Huawei phone, it will still work because the ban only affects the equipment, radio masts and inside telephone exchanges that operators use. So Huawei technology you use at home, such as laptops, tablets, and smartphones, will not be directly impacted, as explained by National Cybersecurity Center, or NHSC. There may also be slow improvement on the hardware, and other restrictions would mean new Huawei devices cannot offer Google services like Play Store and Smart Assistant. Now, also according to the BBC, Vodafone, 3 and EU started rolling out 5G services relying on Huawei's kits nationwide, but now they have to source replacement from other suppliers. But the 2027 deadline will give them extra time to do it, which it will avoid facing mobile coverage blackouts. Alma?
All right, thank you very much. So you can still use Huawei phones then, their devices. It won't be affected.
That's right.
All right, thank
Yes.
you very much, Lovan, for your updates there in the United Kingdom. Keep it coming. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you, Alma, and thanks for having me. So reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Lovan Season, and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Governor Koike has urged residents and businesses to stay on their highest alert as they see another record number of new infections. Joining us live from Japan is Dennis Liu. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Alma. Good evening. Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike said Tokyo confirmed 293 new cases of coronavirus infections Friday, setting another single-day record. Koike said the rise in confirmed cases reflects an increase in virus tests being conducted in the capital, now standing at over 4,000 a day. Friday's figure, which brings the capital's cumulative total to 8,933, has set a new record in the city for 2 days in a row. That has exacerbated the public's fear of a resurgence of the virus. Tokyo Governor Koike Yuriko has once again urged residents and businesses to take measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19. She said that 70% of the newly confirmed virus carriers are in their 20s and 30s. But that infections among people in their 40s and 50s are on the rise. She cited examples of younger people getting infected at parties and people transmitting the virus to older family members. The governor urged residents and businesses to help curb the outbreak and stay on the highest alert. She also asked to ensure that they disinfect their hands and avoid speaking shops, restaurants, and other establishments. The increasing number of daily cases in Tokyo has also forced the government to scale down its subsidies program aimed at boosting tourism, limiting it to people living outside the capital. Japanese Economic Revitalization Minister Nishimura Yasutoshi said on Thursday that the experts approved a plan to exclude from the Go-To campaign trips to Tokyo, including travel within the capital and travel by Tokyo residents. People in other parts of the country will still be eligible for travel subsidies aimed at promoting domestic tourism. The government hopes it will encourage spending as people adjust to a new normal. That is the latest for now. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you, Dennis, for your updates there. Thank you, EBC Japan Bureau.
Thank you for having me reporting live from Tokyo, Japan. This is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
The capital of China's far western Xinjiang region curtailed most flights into the city on Friday and has shut down subway and public bus services after several coronavirus infections were detected, according to government authorities and state-controlled media. So far, at least 5 cases linked to Urumqi have been discovered, including a man who was confirmed positive after he traveled from the city to the eastern province of Zhejiang. The infections were detected beginning on Wednesday, and news of the cases prompted state media outlets in Urumqi to issue assurances on Friday that supermarkets had ample stocks of food, an apparent attempt to discourage panic buying. Aviation authorities announced that 89% of flights servicing Urumqi had been canceled and that the metro system said the city's single line had been shut down from late Thursday. Neither of the brief announcements indicated when normal service might be resumed. The new cases illustrate the continuing difficulty China faces in stamping out the contagion, which emerged in the central Chinese city of Wuhan late last year before spreading throughout the country and globally. After 2 studies this week raised hopes for a potential vaccine, the United States, Britain, and Canada accused Russian-linked hackers of targeting labs in their countries conducting coronavirus vaccine research. In the latest positive sign, British media reported Thursday that an Oxford University trial had shown its prototype vaccine generated an immune response against COVID-19. But then hours later, the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre said a hacking group called APT29 had targeted British labs conducting vaccine research to steal valuable intellectual property. Now, the US, UK, and Canada all accused Russia in a joint security advisory. Moscow denied any involvement, with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying, quote, "Russia has nothing to do with these attempts." Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, said that some states went too quickly and officially jumped over the checkpoints described in the guidelines to reopen America, a recipe for getting into trouble, according to the U.S. top infectious disease specialist. Dr. Fauci was speaking during an interview streamed on Facebook with CEO Mark Zuckerberg.
There were some states that actually, when you look at what the guidelines were for opening, you know, the checkpoints that you'd have to get past before you went to the next phase, some of them went too quickly and officially jumped over them. That, as I had said in previous discussions, is a recipe for getting into trouble. In other situations where the states actually officially, the governors, the mayors, put out and delineated exactly what should be done, but the citizenry of the state or the city had the impression that you went either from lockdown to put caution to the wind. And what we saw were clips of people at bars congregating without masks, not staying distant, in crowds. And that's what I believe is at least part of the explanation for why we've seen this surge as went up. As I've said so often, and I want to repeat it with you here, Mark, is that we should be looking at public health measures as a vehicle or a gateway to opening the country again, to getting the economy back, not as the obstacle in the way, but as a gateway. And if we do it in a measured way, I strongly believe We can turn this around in the southern states that are getting hit right now.
You know, I was certainly sympathetic early on when it was clear that there would be some outbreaks, no matter how well we handled this. But, you know, now that we're here in July, I just think that it was avoidable, and it's really disappointing that, you know, we still don't have adequate testing, that the credibility of our top scientists like yourself and the CDC are being undermined.
Now, Florida is the country's new epicenter and is shaping up as a key battleground in a partisan-tinged national fight over reopening schools in the fall. U.S. President Donald Trump is pushing for schools to open, pinning his re-election hopes on declaring victory over the virus and jump-starting the economy. While cities such as Houston, Los Angeles, and New York plan to begin the school year virtually or on a restricted basis, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is insisting schools reopen fully in August. The Republican governor's demand mirrors that of President Trump, who is facing a tough re-election battle in November and is pushing also for schools to reopen as a sign of a return to normalcy. President Trump, who is trailing Democrat Joe Biden in polling, has even threatened to cut federal funding for those schools that refuse to open their doors. Now, Thursday, U.S. time also illustrated the partisan divide in the U.S. over face masks. Colorado Governor Jared Polis issued a statewide order requiring anyone over the age of 10 to wear a mask in indoor public spaces. But Keisha Lance Bottoms, the Democratic mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, who recently tested positive for COVID-19, as you can see on the screen, was sued over her citywide mask mandate by her state's governor, Republican Brian Kemp, on Thursday. Now, Bottoms noted that the nation's leading health experts recommend wearing masks to curb the spread of the highly contagious virus. Let's listen in.
What's getting lost is the science and the reality of where we are with COVID-19. And there is so much death and sickness around us that I think in many ways people become desensitized to that, unfortunately. But when I look at my husband, who is perfectly healthy, and I look at the toll that COVID-19 has taken on him, he lost 20 pounds in 1 week. And this is someone who's healthy and was able to fight it off. I can only imagine what it's doing to people who aren't going into this fight in the best of health. And so what's getting lost are the lives and the reality that this is a pandemic, and this disease has no regard for title, status, socioeconomic standing, political party affiliation. This disease is hitting everyone. And even, you know, if there is a case to be made outside of just human life and preserving human life, there's an economic case to be made. Goldman Sachs released a study this week that talks about the economic sense that it makes for people to wear masks, because it is the only way that we are going to be able to stop the spread of this virus and be able to get our economy going again.
The lawsuit filed by Republican Governor Brian Kemp alleges that Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms does not have the authority to require stricter public health measures than the state, which has encouraged mask wearing but not required it. The suit also claims that Bottoms does not have the authority to move the city back to a phase 1 state of lockdown reopening. Other Georgia cities have passed similar measures in recent weeks, including Savannah. Savannah Mayor Van Johnson said he was alarmed by the rising case numbers in the city and by the governor's actions. The U.S. sets another record for new daily cases, with 68,428 infections recorded in 24 hours, according to Johns Hopkins University. And in that period, the death toll also climbs by 974 people in the world's worst hit country, which is now seeing a resurgence in the South and the West. Eagle News will be right back.
To Hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Netflix shares dived after the leading streaming entertainment service reported relatively flat quarterly profits despite rising subscriber numbers. Netflix reported a profit of $720 million on revenue of $6.1 billion in the recently ended quarter, compared with $709 million profit on $5.8 billion in revenue during the first 3 months of the year. Wall Street analysts had expected stronger profits, especially as people who are hunkered down at home due to the virus pandemic turned to the service for entertainment. Ranks of paid memberships grew by 10.1 million to about 193 million total, but Netflix warned growth could cool since sheltering in place likely meant people rushed to join in the early months of the pandemic as lockdown began instead of spreading out over the year. Shares quickly dove more than 10% in aftermarket trades that followed release of the earnings figures, but regained a bit of the loss. Wedbush analyst Daniel Ives described the share tumble or the share stumble as a near-term speed bump due to overly exuberant expectations. Netflix is also facing increased competition from tech giants such as Apple and Amazon, along with entertainment titans, including Disney, NBC Universal, and Warner Media. UK flag carrier British Airways is retiring its entire Boeing 747 jumbo jet fleet, it said on Friday, following the huge hit to international air travel caused by the pandemic. The 400-passenger 747 was launched by Boeing in 1970 and dominated international air travel and cargo over the following decades. With 31 jumbos in its fleet, BA currently flies more of the planes than any other airline, according to its statement. It added the last had been due to retire in 2024 as the carrier turns to more modern and fuel-efficient models like Boeing 787 and the Airbus A350. In May, BA's owner, IAG, reported a net loss of 1.68 billion euros or $1.8 billion in the 3 months to the end of March. The airline has announced plans to lay off 12,000 staff, and last month was reported to be selling off artworks by Damien Hirst, Bridget Riley, and Peter Doig, thought to be worth millions of pounds, to raise funds. Boeing itself has announced 16,000 layoffs. The pandemic has battered the air transport sector, with the latest casualty, United Airlines, warning last week it could also lay off as many as 36,000 workers. Virgin Australia has also collapsed and is being bought by an American company. Hong Kong carrier Cathay Pacific issued a profit warning on Friday, estimating it will suffer a historic loss of 9.9 billion Hong Kong dollars in the first half of 2020 as it reels from the coronavirus pandemic. Like airlines worldwide, Cathay has been battered by the evaporation of global travel during the pandemic. But the carrier is especially vulnerable because it has no domestic market to fall back on. In a stark illustration of the travel collapse, Cathay said June passenger numbers were down 99.1% year-on-year. Chief Customer and Commercial Officer Ronald Lam said there was a slight increase in the number of transit passengers following the easing of restrictions at Hong Kong's airport, but they are, quote, yet to see any significant signs of immediate improvement. Hong Kong's government came to the rescue of Cathay earlier this year with a 39 billion Hong Kong dollar recapitalization plan. Cathay Chairman Patrick Healy had described the bailout as the only way to save the airline from collapse. Under the proposal, Cathay will raise about 11.7 billion Hong Kong dollars in a rights issue on the basis of 7 rights shares for every 11 existing shares held, while preference shares will be sold to the government via Aviation 2020 for 19.5 billion Hong Kong dollars and warrants for 1.95 billion subject to adjustment. European leaders warned that the future of their union was at stake as they embarked on a summit to thrash out the terms of a huge post-coronavirus economic rescue plan. Take a look.
So we are at the beginning of the summit now, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If we do it right, we can overcome this crisis stronger and emerge stronger from the crisis. All the necessary pieces are on the table, and a solution is possible.
I think we have quite a difficult negotiations also, so we will see how this will go, but I'm hopeful at this point.
I think it's extremely important that the European Union collectively gives a very strong message to its citizens that it has the wherewithal and the capacity to deal with this unprecedented crisis that has been caused by the global pandemic.
Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel turned 66 as her 26 colleagues returned to Brussels, but she wasn't there to celebrate. With the planned 750 billion euro stimulus package on the line, France's President Emmanuel Macron described it as a moment of truth. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Macron are backing a recovery package made up of a mixture of loans and grants to member states to revive the economy shattered by the virus and the lockdowns. The EU has been plunged into a historic economic crunch by the coronavirus crisis, and EU officials have drawn up plans for a huge stimulus package to lead their countries out of the lockdown. But a determined band of northern capitals is holding out against handing cash to their southern neighbors without their committing to reforms under European oversight. The Netherlands has emerged as the most likely holdout, but Netherlands Prime Minister Mark Rutte's position is backed to varying degrees by fellow members of the so-called Frugal Four, Sweden, Denmark, and Austria. In other news, U.S. Attorney General William Barr said the American people should reevaluate their relationship with China in a speech at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum in Grand Rapids, Michigan, adding that China's communist government uses a wide array of predatory and often unlawful tactics against U.S. companies. Let's listen in.
But no matter how the Chinese seek to characterize it, I do hope that my speech and Mike Pompeo's speech will encourage the American people to reevaluate their relationship with China, so long as it continues to be ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. For American companies in the global marketplace, free and fair competition with China has long been a fantasy. To tilt the playing field to its advantage, China's communist government has perfected a wide array of predatory and often unlawful tactics, currency manipulation. About 80% of all federal economic espionage prosecutions allege conduct undertaken for the benefit of the Chinese state. And about 60% of all trade secret theft cases have been connected to China.
Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying said high-ranking United States officials have lost their minds and gone mad in their attacks on China. Take a look.
Out of their selfish gains, these people can even kidnap the U.S. domestic opinions, kidnap China-U.S. relations, kidnap the international order. They have lost their mind and gone crazy. This is like drinking poison to quench one's thirst. Such short-sighted approach is severely harming the U.S. and the world. The U.S. is the most advanced country in the world, but now it is the epicenter of COVID-19 with the highest number of infection and death tolls. Former U.S. CDC directors said recently that the science in the U.S. is unprecedentedly politicized by the U.S. government, and the U.S. politicians even shifted the blame to Dr. Fauci, a top disease control expert in the U.S. This is a real-world version of House of Cards, and it costs people's lives and creates a division in the society. This is the American people's misfortune. China doesn't intend to challenge or replace the U.S. We do not want to confront the U.S. We care about our people's welfare, our nation's revitalization, and world peace and stability. A sparrow cannot understand the aspiration of a swan. So for those people who claim that China wants to surpass the U.S. to become a superpower, to overthrow the rules-based international system, they are clearly assuming China based on their own patterns, and they're misinterpreting our strategic intentions.
Meanwhile, Apple opened a new flagship store in Beijing, replacing its first store in China, which opened in 2008. Scores of customers lined up on Friday and tested products in the new shop, which is roughly double the size of the company's first in China. Located in Beijing's upscale shopping district, Sanlitun, the outlet replaces and more than doubles the size of Apple's first store in China in the same location, which instantly caused a sensation back in 2008. The landmark building reopened in the heat of U.S. scrutiny over the hardware behemoth's ties with China. In a speech delivered on Thursday, Attorney General, if we can recall, William Barr attacked the raft of American tech companies, including Apple, for playing by China's rules. He also singled out Apple for being acquiescence to the Chinese communists. Apple has long relied on China not just for manufacturing partners, but also generating revenues from App Store and iPhone sales. Eagle News, we'll be right back.
Tomorrow, I love ya. Tomorrow, you're always a day away.
Vast swathes of China have been inundated by the worst flooding in decades along the mighty Yangtze River, with residents now piling into boats and makeshift rafts to escape a deluge that has collapsed flood defenses and turned their homes into waterways. Take a look. Heavy rains since June have left at least 141 people dead and missing, forced nearly 15 million people to be evacuated from their homes in July alone, and caused billions of dollars in economic losses. according to the government. Waters in more than 400 rivers have exceeded warning levels, while some have reached historic highs over a period that officials say has caused the highest average rainfall levels across the Yangtze Basin since 1961. Summer rains and seasonal glacial melt in the river's Tibetan Plateau headwaters cause routine annual flooding. Authorities are particularly concerned with Poyang Lake, China's largest freshwater lake in hard-hit Jiangxi province. Water levels there have hit historic highs, prompting an effort by more than 100,000 soldiers and other personnel to rescue residents and shore up dikes and levees to prevent worse floodings. And the Tokyo art exhibit opened to enthusiastic visitors, but many of those circulating weren't just there to soak in some culture. They were casing the joint for a midnight raid. Hours after the gallery closed for the night, a crowd had gathered ready to pounce on the artworks. Take a look.
なんかただ持って帰るのだとなんか作る側もなんかそんなにテンションが上がらないんじゃないかなとやっぱ見る側もなんかそんなありがたみなく持ってっちゃうと思うんですけど、なんか盗めるってやるとやっぱこれ絶対欲しいみたいななんか気持ちがすごい入るのかなと思って、まあ疑似的にですけどなんかちょっとリスクを背負うっていうかだけど欲しいみたいなことがあって、そこの関係性がやっぱ面白いなと思って。
The Euro-American probe Solar Orbiter delivered the closest images ever taken of the sun. Take a look. Captured by the solar orbiter, the images show tiny solar flares that scientists call campfires, which could explain the heating of the solar corona, one of the most mysterious phenomena of our closest star. The European Space Agency Solar Orbiter blasted off from Florida's Cape Canaveral in February and completed its first flyby of our star last month, sending back unprecedented images of phenomena close to its surface. Daniel Muller, Solar Orbiter project scientist at ESA, said, quote, "The first images are exceeding our expectations and that they can already see hints of very interesting phenomena that they've not been able to observe in detail before. Solar winds and flares emit billions of highly charged particles that impact planets, including Earth. But the phenomena remain poorly understood despite decades of research. The largest solar storm on record hit North America in September of 1859. It knocked out much of the continent's telegraph network and bathed the skies in an aura viewable as far away as the Caribbean. Solar ejections can also disrupt radar systems, radio networks, and can even render satellites useless, though such extremes are very rare." In time of physical and emotional distance, we give importance to the unsung service delivered by our frontliners. Our news correspondents positioned all over the world. Without them, we would not have the eagle-eye focus on the facts of this pandemic and its continuing repercussions on our lives. To our international correspondents, thank you for staying in touch with our viewers. Stay safe, protect yourselves and others. Good night. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.
Ein sonniger Tag heute hier in Berlin vor dem Bundestag. Ich bin Irene Juliet Arzadon und möchte diese Gelegenheit